When we look at a pair of high heels today, our minds instantly map them to the realms of high fashion, modern femininity, and red carpet elegance. It is an aesthetic design for posture, allure, and societal sophistication. But if you could trace the DNA of this shoe back through the centuries, past the runway of Paris and the cobbler of 20th century Italy, you would find yourself in a place you least expect, a landscape of blood, iron, and dust. For centuries, the high heel was not an instrument of courtship or catwalks. It was a piece of military hardware. It was tactical gear, forged for the brutal utility of warfare and worn exclusively by the world's most fearsome men. This is the untold history of how a combat asset became a cultural icon, and how the ultimate symbol of femininity began its life on the feet of killers. To understand the origin of the heel, we must look to the east. In the 10th century, Persia boasted one of the most elite military forces in the world, largely driven by their unparalleled mastery of cavalry warfare. Imagine galloping at breakneck speed across an uneven battlefield, hands completely occupied by a heavy composite bow. To survive, a Persian soldier had to stand up in his stirrups, shoot accurately in mid-stride, and maintain perfect balance while his horse moved beneath him. The solution to this extreme physics problem was remarkably simple: the heel. By carving a steep recess into the sole of the boot, Persian soldier invited a locking mechanism. When the soldier stood up to release an arrow, the heel hooked onto the metal bar of the stirrup, preventing his foot from slipping. It provided a rigid, immovable anchor. In a sense, the high heel was the 10th century equivalent of a clip and pedal or a modern rifle biopod, a stabilizing tool that maximized lethal efficiency. For this warrior, the heel meant the difference between a successful cavalry charge and being thrown from a horse to be trampled to death. It was a pure function. There was no vanity in these inches. There was only tactical survival. So, how did a piece of Persia's military equipment find its way into the wardrobe of European aristocracy? In 1599, the Persian monarch Shah Abbas I sent a diplomatic mission to Europe to forge alliance against a common enemy, the Ottoman Empire. When these Persian emissary arrived in the court of Russia, Germany, and Spain, they brought with them their culture, their elite equestrian skills, and of course their unique heeled boots. To the European aristocracy, these heels were intoxicating. They represented everything a nobleman desired: exoticism, military prowess, and masculine dominance. European elites quickly adopted the style, but as the heel transitioned from the battlefield to the palace floor, its utility mutated. It was no longer about locking into a stirrup. It was about elevating one's stature, both literally and socially. The most famous champion of this trend was King Louis XIV of France. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches, Louis used heels to tower over his subjects. He mandated that only members of his royal court were permitted to wear the famous royal red heels. In this era, the high heels screamed privilege. It said to the world, "I do not work in fields. I do not work in common men. I belong to a caste of rulers." It was the ultimate expression of masculine power, wealth, and military legacy. By the late 17th century, a fascinating cultural phenomenon occurred. Women, looking to appropriate the power and status associated with men's fashion, began adapting elements of the masculine wardrobe. They cut their hair, wore military style, and crucially, they began wearing heels. For a brief period, both men and women wore high heels, side by side, as a gender-neutral symbol of high status. But this shared aesthetic wouldn't last. The 18th century brought the Age of Enlightenment, shifting the Western world's value towards rationality, practicality, and egalitarianism. Men's fashion underwent what historians call the Great Masculine Renaissance. Men abandoned jewelry, bright fabrics, and heels in favor of utilitarianism, uniform clothing that signaled they were serious, rational citizens of the new world. As men stepped down from their heels, women stepped into them permanently. The heel was redesigned, becoming narrower, more elegant, and increasingly divorced from its rugged origins. By the time the 19th century arrived, the world had completely forgotten that the shoe had ever belonged to a soldier. Today, the high heel exists in a state of historical irony. We view it as a triumph of feminine style. Yet, its architecture remains inherently tied to the rigid, commanding posture of its military ancestors. Even today, if you look closely at the dress uniform of militaries around the globe, from the United States Marine Corps to the Royal Guards of Europe, you will still find a distinct pronounced heel on their ceremonial boots. It remains there as a vestige of the past, a silent nod to the days when a right heel meant a steady aim. History has a unique way of recycling utility into art. The high heel was born in the stirrups of elite horsemen, carried across continents by diplomats, and weaponized as a symbol of royal supremacy before finding its home in modern fashion. So, the next time you hear the sharp, commanding strike of a heel against the pavement, remember, you aren't just listening to the sound of fashion. You are listening to the echo of the battlefield.